Have you ever stopped to wonder why so many of our favorite stories feel strangely familiar? Why the heroes in today's movies, the villains in our video games, or even the moral dilemmas in best-selling novels echo something deeper, something ancient? It's because they do. The stories we love today aren't just original creations, they're part of a vast, unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years, woven from the threads of ancient legends. Think about it, the brave hero defying impossible odds, the cunning trickster outsmarting their enemies, the terrifying monster lurking in the shadows. These aren't just modern tropes. They're timeless archetypes, passed down through generations, reshaped and reimagined but never truly forgotten. Take a moment to consider the last fantasy movie you watched or the last adventure novel you couldn't put down. Chances are its roots dig deep into the soil of mythology. The lightning-wielding superhero, he owes a debt to Zeus, the brooding vampire or the noble werewolf. Their ancestors prowl the edges of medieval folklore. Even the futuristic sagas set in distant galaxies often mirror the same epic journeys found in the oldest surviving texts. These stories endure because they speak to something universal in us: our fears, our dreams, our deepest questions about what it means to be human. And that's the incredible power of ancient legends. They don't just belong to the past. They live on, quietly shaping the myths of our modern world. So how did these age-old tales survive millennia? Why do they still resonate so powerfully today? The answer lies in their ability to adapt, to find new forms while keeping their core truths intact. From the campfires of prehistoric storytellers to the glowing screens of our devices, these narratives have traveled an unimaginable distance, evolving yet never losing their essence. In this video, we'll trace that journey, uncovering how the gods and monsters of old became the superheroes and villains we know now, how ancient moral lessons still guide our stories, and why, no matter how much the world changes, we keep returning to these foundational myths. By the end, you'll never look at your favorite stories the same way again. Because once you see the threads connecting the past to the present, you'll realize the myths we love today are part of a tradition as old as storytelling itself. Stories are the lifeblood of human civilization, the invisible threads that connect generations across time. Long before the written word, our ancestors gathered under starlit skies, weaving tales that explained the mysteries of the world around them. The thunder wasn't just noise, it was the anger of a god. The changing seasons weren't just cycles of nature, they were the result of a goddess's grief or a hero's triumph. These legends weren't mere fiction, they were the earliest attempts to understand life's biggest questions, and that's why they've endured. Whether carved into Mesopotamian clay tablets, painted on Egyptian tomb walls, or recited by Chinese poets, these stories served as the first textbooks, law codes, and moral guides rolled into one. Consider the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving tales. At its heart, it's a story about friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning, themes as relevant today as they were 4,000 years ago. Or the myths of ancient Egypt, where the struggle between order and chaos mirrored the Nile's unpredictable floods, teaching people how to live in harmony with forces beyond their control. These weren't just stories, they were survival manuals, psychological tools, and cultural glue. They told people who they were, where they came from, and how to navigate a world full of dangers and wonders. Fast forward to today, and the essence remains unchanged. Superhero films, there are modern epics, where larger-than-life figures battle cosmic threats, just like the gods of old. Dystopian novels, they echo the cautionary tales of hubris found in Greek tragedies. Even reality TV, with its exaggerated rivalries and dramatic arcs, taps into the same primal love of conflict and resolution that made ancient myths so compelling. The mediums have evolved, from oral traditions to parchment, from printing presses to pixels, but the human need for stories that make sense of our fears, desires, and dreams hasn't faded. What's truly fascinating is how these ancient narratives adapt without losing their core. Take the hero's journey, a template found in everything from Homer's Odyssey to Star Wars. The names change, the settings update, but the blueprint, the call to adventure, the trials, the transformation stays the same because it reflects something fundamental about human experience. We all face challenges, we all seek growth, and we all crave stories that reassure us we're not alone in that struggle. That's the magic of storytelling. It turns individual experiences into shared truths, bridging the gap between the ancient and the modern with a single, unbroken thread. What makes a hero, whether it's a demigod from ancient Mesopotamia or a caped crusader from modern metropolis? The answer lies in a pattern so universal it feels almost instinctive. The hero's journey isn't just a storytelling device, it's a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest aspirations. From Gilgamesh's quest for immortality to Superman's struggle to protect Earth, these narratives share a DNA so strong it transcends time and culture. Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth, but you don't need to be a mythologist to recognize its power. It's the blueprint behind nearly every epic tale you've ever loved, whether carved into a clay tablet 4,000 years ago or projected onto a movie screen last summer. Let's break it down. Every hero's journey begins with a call to adventure, a moment that pulls them from their ordinary world into the unknown. For Gilgamesh, it was the death of his friend Enkidu, sending him on a desperate search for eternal life. For Superman, it's the destruction of Krypton, forcing him to embrace his destiny as Earth's protector. The specifics change, but the emotional core remains identical, a challenge that demands growth. Then comes the initiation phase, where the hero faces trials that test their strength, wit, and moral fiber. Odysseus navigating the treachery of gods and monsters, or Wonder Woman stepping onto the battlefield of World War I. These are the crucibles that forge legends. And finally, the return, where the hero brings back wisdom or power to transform their world. Gilgamesh doesn't gain immortality, but he learns the value of mortal life. Spider-Man doesn't just stop villains, he carries the weight of responsibility that shapes every choice. What's remarkable isn't just that this pattern repeats across millennia, it's how effortlessly it adapts. Ancient heroes battled literal dragons, modern ones face metaphorical ones, corruption, injustice, the darkness within. Yet the underlying message never fades. These stories reassure us that growth is possible, that ordinary individuals can rise to extraordinary challenges. They're cultural roadmaps, teaching us how to navigate loss, fear, and the unknown. When Luke Skywalker stares at twin suns on Tatooine, yearning for something greater, he's channeling the same restlessness that drove Gilgamesh to the edge of the world. When Katniss Everdeen volunteers as tribute, she's echoing the self-sacrifice found in 1,000 ancient myths. This isn't imitation, it's evolution. Modern storytellers aren't copying the past, they're tapping into a shared human language. Superheroes wear spandex instead of togas, but their battles still symbolize the eternal struggle between light and shadow. The settings shift from enchanted forests to dystopian cities, but the questions remain. What does it mean to be brave, to be worthy, to face the abyss and return with hope? That's why these stories endure. They're not just entertainment, they're the echoes of our oldest conversations about what it means to be human. And as long as we keep asking those questions, the hero's journey will continue, reinvented for every new generation. The gods of old never really left us. They just traded their temples for comic books and streaming services. Look closely at today's most iconic characters, and you'll spot the fingerprints of ancient deities everywhere. Take Thor, Marvel's thunder-wielding hero. He's not just inspired by Norse mythology, he's a direct descendant, right down to the hammer that channels the storm's fury. But here's what's fascinating. While the original Thor represented the raw, untamed power of nature, his modern counterpart grapples with very human struggles: family drama, self-doubt, the weight of leadership. This evolution reveals something profound about how divine archetypes adapt. Ancient gods were forces to be feared or worshipped. Today's versions hold up a mirror to our own complexities. Loki's transformation is even more telling. In Norse sagas, he was a chaotic trickster who brought about Ragnarok, the end of the world. Fast forward to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's still the god of mischief, but now audiences adore his wit, his vulnerability, his redemption arc. This shift reflects how modern storytelling humanizes the divine, turning distant mythological figures into characters we root for. The same pattern repeats across cultures. Anubis, the Egyptian judge of souls, finds a parallel in Batman's relentless pursuit of justice. Athena's strategic brilliance lives on in characters like Hermione Granger, who wits her way through battles just as the goddess once did. What makes these archetypes so enduring? They're not just templates, they're psychological blueprints. The Greeks didn't create Zeus as a mere weather god. He embodied authority, passion, and the dangerous allure of power, themes that resonate in Tony Stark's charisma and flawed genius. Hera's jealousy and Hades' brooding isolation aren't just divine traits, they're exaggerated versions of emotions we all recognize. That's why Neil Gaiman's American Gods works so brilliantly. It takes these ancient patterns and plants them in a world of roadside attractions and shadowy corporations, proving their adaptability. When Mr. Wednesday schemes his way across America, he's not just Odin in a suit. He's a reminder that gods survive by evolving, by finding new ways to reflect the human experience. Even the darker divine aspects persist. The Joker's chaotic violence echoes Loki's destructive games, while Wonder Woman's compassion and warrior spirit mirror Athena and Artemis combined. These aren't lazy copies, they're reinventions, proving that the core of these characters speaks to something timeless. After all, what is a superhero if not a modern demigod? They walk among us, flawed yet extraordinary, wrestling with moral dilemmas that would feel familiar to any Olympian. The scales have simply shifted. Where ancient myths used gods to explain natural disasters, today's stories use them to explore identity, power, and what happens when the divine collides with the everyday. And that collision, it's where the magic happens, where thousand-year-old archetypes feel as fresh as tomorrow's headlines. Monsters have always been more than just scary bedtime stories. They're reflections of the darkness we see in ourselves and the world around us. Take the vampire, a creature that's undergone one of the most dramatic transformations in mythic history. In medieval Europe, vampires were grotesque, plague-bearing nightmares, rising from graves to drain the life from villages. They embodied very real fears of disease, death, and the unknown. But fast forward to today, and vampires sparkle in sunlight, fall in love, and wrestle with their morality. What changed? Not the creature itself, but what we project onto it. Bram Stoker's Dracula tapped into Victorian anxieties about sexuality and foreign influence, while modern versions like Twilight's Edward Cullen mirror contemporary struggles with identity and belonging. The vampire's fangs remain, but its meaning shifts with every generation. Dragons tell a similar story. In ancient China, they were celestial beings of wisdom and power, symbols of imperial authority and natural balance. European legends, though, painted them as fire-breathing hoarders, monsters to be slain by knights like Saint George. These differences weren't arbitrary, they reflected cultural values. The Chinese dragon's serpentine grace echoed harmony with nature, while the Western dragon's greed mirrored fears of unchecked power. Today, dragons soar somewhere in between. In How to Train Your Dragon, Toothless is neither mindless beast nor deity, but a companion whose bond with Hiccup speaks to our longing for connection in a fragmented world. Even Smaug, the greedy terror of The Hobbit, feels eerily relevant in an age of corporate excess and environmental ruin. What's truly fascinating is how these creatures adapt without losing their essence. The werewolf, once a symbol of primal savagery in folklore, now represents the struggle between control and chaos in stories like Teen Wolf or Harry Potter. The zombie, rooted in Haitian Vodou as a mindless servant, became a Cold War metaphor for conformity in Night of the Living Dead, and today, it's a stand-in for pandemics or consumerism in shows like The Walking Dead. These monsters are cultural chameleons, taking on new fears while keeping their mythic bones intact. Why do they endure? Because monsters are more than threats, they're teachers. The banshee's wail still warns of impending loss, just as it did in Irish folklore. The Japanese yokai, mischievous spirits of old, now populate anime as metaphors for societal pressures. Even the humble ghost from Shakespeare's Hamlet to The Conjuring remains a vessel for our unresolved grief and guilt. These creatures persist because they give form to what we can't quite name, the shadows in our collective psyche. Every time we reinvent them, we're not just telling stories, we're holding up a mirror, asking who we are, what we fear, and what we dare to become. Love stories that end in tragedy have a strange grip on our hearts. They haunt us, linger in our memories long after the final page is turned or the screen fades to black. There's something irresistible about love that defies the odds, only to be crushed by forces beyond control. Orpheus turning back to look at Eurydice, sealing her fate forever. Tristan and Isolde doomed by a love potion and the betrayal of a king. These aren't just ancient plots, they're emotional blueprints, templates so powerful they've been recycled for thousands of years with the same devastating effect. Shakespeare didn't invent star-crossed lovers. He borrowed from a tradition already ancient by his time, then gave it new life with feuding families in Verona. And in doing so, he proved something remarkable. The details might change, but the heartache feels just as raw, whether you're hearing it in a Greek amphitheater or a multiplex. Modern retellings thrive on this timelessness. Take Titanic, a blockbuster that could have easily been called Romeo and Juliet on a boat. The setting is new, the dialogue fresh, but the bones of the story are as old as the hills. Rose and Jack aren't just two people falling in love. They're archetypes, embodying the same clash of class and fate that made Tristan and Isolde's love so forbidden. Even the iceberg feels like a stand-in for the cruel hand of destiny, the kind of unstoppable force that's thwarted lovers since the dawn of storytelling. And when Rose lets go of Jack's hand in that freezing water, it's the same gut-punch moment as Orpheus losing Eurydice, a reminder that love, no matter how fierce, can't always cheat death. What's fascinating is how these stories adapt without losing their power. The Fault in Our Stars swaps ancient curses for modern illness, but the emotional stakes are identical. Hazel and Gus aren't doomed by a miscommunication or a vengeful god, they're up against cancer, a foe just as merciless. Yet their story resonates because it taps into that same universal truth. Love is brightest when it's fleeting. The tears we shed for them are the same ones wept for Dido and Aeneas, for Lancelot and Guinevere. It's why La La Land's bittersweet ending hits so hard, because sometimes love isn't about happy endings. Sometimes it's about the beauty of what could have been, the ache of sacrifice, the way a single moment can echo across a lifetime. The genius of these retellings lies in their ability to make the ancient feel immediate. West Side Story transplants Romeo and Juliet to New York streets, swapping swords for switchblades but keeping the tragedy intact. Brokeback Mountain gives us a love as doomed as any myth, with societal prejudice playing the role of the capricious gods. Even Game of Thrones borrows from the Tristan and Isolde playbook, with Jon Snow and Ygritte star-crossed romance ending in arrows and betrayal. These stories work because they're not just copying the past, they're channeling it, proving that the human heart hasn't changed much since the first bard strummed a lyre. We still crave love stories that hurt, that remind us how fragile and fierce love can be. And as long as that's true, Orpheus will keep turning around, Romeo will keep drinking the poison, and Jack will keep sinking into the dark, because some truths are too powerful to stay buried in the past. Creation myths are humanity's first attempts to answer the most profound question of all. Where did everything come from? Every ancient culture spun its own cosmic origin story, each as vivid and imaginative as the last. The Norse believed the universe began in the void of Ginnungagap, where the giant Ymir emerged from melting ice, his body later forming the world itself. The ancient Egyptians told of a primordial ocean, Nun, from which the sun god Ra rose to bring light and order. Hindu scriptures describe Brahma, the creator, unfolding reality like a lotus from the navel of Vishnu. These stories weren't just fantastical explanations, they were frameworks for understanding existence, imbued with cultural values and spiritual meaning. Fast forward to today, and science fiction has become our modern creation mythos. Films like Interstellar and Prometheus might trade gods for wormholes and engineers, but they're wrestling with the same fundamental awe. When Interstellar's Cooper falls into a black hole and navigates a fifth-dimensional space to save humanity, it's not so different from the Polynesian hero Maui fishing up islands from the sea. Both are tales of defiance against cosmic forces, of mortals reaching beyond their limits to shape destiny. Prometheus literally sends its characters searching for humanity's creators among the stars, echoing the Sumerian belief that gods molded humans from clay. The questions haven't changed. Who made us? Why are we here? What lies beyond the edges of our understanding? What's striking is how these narratives mirror each other in structure, not just theme. Ancient myths often featured a chaotic void like the Greek chaos or the Babylonian Tiamat before order emerged. Modern sci-fi loves its own version of the void, the singularity before the Big Bang, the blank slate of a simulated reality, or the cold vacuum of deep space where 2001, a space odyssey's monoliths whisper secrets of evolution. Even the archetypes persist. The all-knowing creator, whether Brahma or the Matrix's architect, remains an enigmatic figure, distant and inscrutable. The trickster who steals fire, Prometheus in Greek myth, or the rogue AI in Ex Machina still challenges divine authority, blurring the line between salvation and hubris. This isn't coincidence, it's proof that storytelling at its core is how we process the unfathomable. When ancient cultures imagined gods shaping mountains and rivers, they were mapping the unknown onto the familiar. Today, we do the same with quantum physics and multiverse theory. Everything, everywhere, all at once isn't just a wild ride through alternate realities. It's a spiritual successor to the Aboriginal Dreamtime, where every possibility exists simultaneously. The Marvel Cinematic Universe's Infinity Stones owe a debt to alchemical lore, where primal elements held the key to cosmic balance. Even the dystopian wastelands of Mad Max or Blade Runner riff on mythological floods and apocalypses, visions of worlds reborn from ruin. The brilliance of these modern myths lies in their adaptability. They don't just retell the old stories, they recontextualize them. Arrival's heptapods, with their circular language, offer a creation myth about time itself, challenging our linear view of existence, much like Hindu cosmology's cyclical universes. Annihilation's shimmering zone mirrors the Celtic otherworld, a liminal space where the rules of reality dissolve. And when Doctor Who's Time Lords manipulate history like gods, they're channeling the same awe and caution that ancient cultures felt toward their deities. So why does this matter? Because these stories are more than entertainment. They're the language we use to grapple with mysteries science hasn't yet solved. The Big Bang Theory tells us how the universe began, but not why. Ancient myths filled that gap with gods and magic. Sci-fi fills it with aliens and simulations. Both are attempts to make the infinite feel intimate, to remind us that the universe, for all its vastness, is a story we're still writing, one where the oldest questions continue to spark the newest adventures. Tricksters are the wild cards of mythology, the ones who upend expectations, break rules, and force everyone around them to see the world differently. Whether it's Loki's schemes in Norse sagas, Anansi's clever webs in African folklore, or Coyote's chaotic antics in Native American traditions, these figures thrive in the space between order and chaos. They're not just troublemakers, they're essential disruptors, shaking rigid systems to their core. And here's the thing, we can't get enough of them. From Deadpool's fourth wall, breaking humor to Tyrion Lannister's razor-sharp wit, modern storytelling is packed with characters who carry the trickster's torch, proving that this archetype is anything but outdated. What makes tricksters so timeless? It's their dual nature, their ability to destroy and create in the same breath. Take Anansi, the spider god of West African lore. He's a master manipulator, spinning lies as deftly as he spins webs, yet his deceptions often reveal deeper truths about human nature. In one tale, he tricks the sky god into sharing stories with the world, turning knowledge from a privilege of the gods into a gift for all. That's the trickster's paradox. Their chaos has purpose. They're the ones who steal fire, challenge tyrants, and expose hypocrisy, even if their methods are anything but noble. Modern media understands this power perfectly. Look at Deadpool, who might seem like a crude joke machine at first glance until you realize his antics force other characters and the audience to confront uncomfortable truths about heroism, morality, and even the absurdity of storytelling itself. Or Tyrion Lannister, whose sharp tongue and strategic mind make him the ultimate survivor in a world where honor gets you killed. These characters aren't just entertaining, they're mirrors held up to society, reflecting the flaws and contradictions we'd rather ignore. Even in children's stories, the trickster's role is vital. Bugs Bunny outsmarting Elmer Fudd isn't just slapstick, it's a tiny rebellion against authority, a reminder that the underdog can win with wit instead of brute force. The Cat in the Hat turns a dull afternoon into glorious mayhem, teaching kids and adults that rules aren't always sacred. These characters resonate because they tap into a universal truth: progress often requires a little chaos. Without tricksters, stories and societies would stagnate. But here's where it gets really interesting. The trickster isn't just a character type. It's a narrative function, a force that keeps stories from becoming too predictable. In ancient myths, tricksters were the ones who ensured heroes didn't grow complacent. In modern tales, they're the ones who puncture cliches, subvert tropes, and remind us that the world is messier than neat moral lessons. Whether it's the Joker's anarchy challenging Batman's order or the wry humor of Rick and Morty deconstructing sci-fi conventions, tricksters keep storytelling alive, unpredictable, and endlessly relevant. So the next time you encounter a character who refuses to play by the rules, who laughs in the face of authority and leaves chaos and maybe a little wisdom in their wake, remember, you're witnessing a tradition as old as storytelling itself. The trickster isn't just a relic of ancient myths. They're the spark that keeps stories, and maybe even humanity, from standing still. Fate and free will, two forces locked in an eternal tug of war, each pulling at the heart of storytelling since the first myths were whispered around fires. The ancient Greeks believed the fates themselves spun the threads of destiny, their shears deciding the moment of every mortal's end. No one escaped their design, not even kings like Oedipus, whose desperate attempts to avoid his terrible prophecy only sealed his doom. Norse legends spoke of Ragnarok, an apocalypse so inevitable that even the gods prepared for it, knowing their battles were just delaying the inevitable. These weren't just stories, they were confrontations with a terrifying idea. What if our choices don't matter? What if the future is already written? Fast forward to today, and the same tension thrums through our screens and pages. The Matrix's oracle sits in her kitchen, offering cryptic cookies and prophecies that bend but never break. Neo's journey hinges on whether he's truly the one or just another piece in a predetermined puzzle. Game of Thrones plays with prophecy like a double-edged sword. Melisandre's visions drive kings to madness, while Cersei's obsession with a witch's prediction becomes a self-fulfilling spiral. Even Harry Potter wrestles with it. Was Harry always destined to defeat Voldemort, or did his choices and the love he carried rewrite what seemed inevitable? What makes this debate so enduring? It's the razor's edge between comfort and terror. The idea of fate can be soothing, a promise that chaos has order, that suffering has meaning. But it can also feel like a cage, stripping away our sense of agency. Free will, on the other hand, empowers us, but at a cost: the weight of responsibility, the fear that one misstep could unravel everything. Ancient myths leaned hard into fate, often as a way to explain the unexplainable: why disasters struck, why good people suffered. Today's stories, though, often blur the lines. The Good Place's cosmic twist reveals that even an all-knowing system can be hacked by human choice. Doctor Strange stares into 14 million futures, searching for the one sliver where free will tips the scales against destiny. The brilliance of these narratives lies in their ambiguity. They don't just ask whether fate exists, they ask what we do with that knowledge. Do we fight it like Oedipus, only to run headlong into it? Do we embrace it like the Avengers, assembling for a battle they know some won't survive? Or do we redefine it, like Everything Everywhere All at Once's Evelyn, who shatters the multiverse's deterministic paths by choosing kindness in the chaos? These stories aren't just entertainment, they're rehearsals for our own existential dilemmas. Every time we wonder if we're on the right path, if our decisions matter, if some unseen hand guides us, we're stepping into the same arena as the heroes and gods of old. And that's why the debate never fades, because whether we call it destiny, probability, or just the universe's strange sense of humor, the question remains: are we the authors of our stories, or just characters in a tale much older than ourselves? Magic and technology, two words that seem worlds apart, yet they dance around the same human longing to bend reality to our will. In ancient times, a sorcerer chanting incantations over a cauldron wasn't so different from a programmer typing code into a glowing screen. Both are crafting something from nothing, conjuring the impossible into existence. Think about it. The wizard's spellbook and the engineer's blueprint serve the same purpose. One uses runes and rituals to summon storms. The other uses algorithms and electricity to control them. The tools change, but the ambition remains. We've always craved mastery over the unseen forces around us, whether we call it magic or machine learning. Consider how effortlessly modern storytelling blurs these lines. In Black Mirror, a grieving woman uses AI to reconstruct her dead lover's voice, a scenario that would fit neatly into an old folktale about necromancy and forbidden knowledge. Westworld's android hosts, with their uncanny humanity, echo the golems of Jewish myth, creatures molded from clay and brought to life with sacred words. Even The Matrix's red pill isn't just sci-fi. It's the modern equivalent of a shaman's vision quest, a doorway to hidden truths. These narratives tap into the same awe and unease that ancient myths did: the thrill of power, the terror of losing control. What's fascinating is how this duality plays out in real-world tech. Augmented reality filters that transform faces with a swipe, that's shape-shifting straight out of Celtic legends. Voice assistants like Siri or Alexa, they're the digital descendants of oracle bones and talking statues, offering answers from the void. Even CRISPR gene editing, with its ability to rewrite life itself, feels less like science and more like alchemy, the old dream of transmutation, now possible in a lab coat instead of a robe. The difference is merely one of mechanism. Magic was once the explanation for what we couldn't understand. Now, technology is the vehicle for what we've learned to manipulate. But here's where the mythic tension flares up. Every advancement carries the shadow of a warning. Ancient myths overflow with tales of hubris mortals punished for stealing divine fire or flying too close to the sun. Today's stories just swap Icarus wings for rogue AI or virtual prisons. Ex Machina's Ava isn't so different from Pandora, her curiosity unleashing chaos. Snowpiercer's climate catastrophe mirrors the flood myths of old, where humanity's arrogance drowns the world. These aren't just plot devices, they're cultural memories, reminding us that power without wisdom is a recipe for ruin. Yet there's hope in this cycle too. For every cautionary tale, there's a counter-narrative of wonder. The holograms in Star Wars or the healing tech in Elysium rekindle the oldest human dream, that magic or its technological twin can heal, connect, and elevate us. Maybe that's why these stories endure. They're not just about gadgets or spells, they're about the eternal human dance with the unknown. Whether we're whispering to spirits or programming silicon, we're still reaching for the same thing, a glimpse behind the curtain of reality, where the impossible waits to be unmasked. Stories have always been restless travelers, slipping across borders long before passports existed. A merchant carrying silk along the Silk Road might have shared a tale from his homeland over a campfire, only to find it retold with local flavors 1,000 miles away. That's how myths became global citizens, not through conquest or decree, but through the quiet alchemy of human connection. Take Cinderella, a story so universal it feels like it's always been there. The version you know, glass slippers and a fairy godmother, is just one thread in a tapestry that stretches from 9th century China, where Ye Shen outwitted her stepfamily with the help of a magical fish, to the indigenous Zuni people's tale of a maiden who danced in moccasins made by the gods. Each culture didn't just borrow the story, they remade it, weaving in their own values, landscapes, and dreams. The same exchange thrives today, turbocharged by the digital age. Hollywood superheroes might dominate global box offices, but look closer, and you'll see how deeply they're indebted to myths from elsewhere. Black Panther's Wakanda draws on the advanced kingdoms of pre-colonial Africa, while Mona's oceanic journey resurrects Polynesian wayfinding legends with Disney's glitter. But the flow isn't one way. Japanese anime, steeped in Shinto spirits and yokai folklore, has reshaped Western storytelling. Spirited Away's bathhouse for gods feels as familiar to American audiences as it does in Tokyo, proving that the strange can become universal when told with heart. Meanwhile, the Caribbean's Anansi stories, born in West Africa and carried across the Atlantic by the transatlantic slave trade, now inspire everything from Neil Gaiman's novels to Marvel's Spider-Verse, where Miles Morales' Afro-Latino roots echo the Tricksters' clever, resilient spirit. What's remarkable isn't just the borrowing, it's the transformation. The Japanese kappa, a mischievous water demon with a bowl-shaped head, might haunt a river in one tale, but in Studio Ghibli films, it becomes a quirky environmental symbol. The Norse Valkyries, once fearsome choosers of the slain, now soar through Assassin's Creed as warrior women with agency and depth. Even zombies, rooted in Haitian voodoo as reanimated corpses under a sorcerer's control, have morphed into viral hordes reflecting modern anxieties about pandemics and mob mentality. These aren't just updates, they're conversations, a dialogue between the past and present, the local and the global. This cross-pollination does more than entertain, it builds bridges. When Naruto borrows from Hindu epic Mahabharata to craft its themes of destiny and brotherhood, or when The Witcher blends Slavic folklore with Arthurian legend, they're not just creating fantasy worlds. They're showing us how myths at their best remind us of our shared humanity, because a story that resonates in Lagos, Mumbai, or Rio is never just a story. It's a testament to the fact that no matter how far apart we seem, we're still gathered around the same proverbial campfire, passing down the same essential truths, just with new voices, new twists, and maybe a few more special effects. Urban legends are the myths that refuse to stay in the past. They slither into our modern lives, shape-shifting to fit the cracks in our digital world. Think about The Vanishing Hitchhiker, a story whispered in hushed tones since the 1940s, where a ghostly stranger disappears from the backseat of a car. Or Slender Man, a faceless horror born from an internet forum in 2009, who stalked his way from pixelated screens to real-life playgrounds. These aren't just scary stories, they're barometers of our deepest anxieties. The Hitchhiker plays on fears of the open road, of strangers in the dark. Slender Man embodies the terror of the unseen predator lurking in the digital shadows. The settings change, from lonely highways to glowing laptop screens, but the pulse of these tales remains the same, a warning wrapped in a shiver. What's fascinating is how seamlessly these legends bridge ancient instincts and modern technology. The internet doesn't just spread urban myths, it supercharges them. A ghost story that might have taken decades to cross continents now circles the globe in hours, mutating with each retweet or TikTok stitch. Creepypastas, those chilling, copy-pasted tales, are the campfire stories of the 21st century, passed not from mouth to ear but from screen to screen. Remember the Momo Challenge, a grotesque, wide-eyed sculpture that allegedly whispered self-harm instructions to children through YouTube videos. It was debunked, but not before it ignited worldwide panic. Why? Because it tapped into a primal fear, the stranger in the machine, corrupting innocence where parents felt most powerless. The brilliance of urban legends lies in their adaptability. They're like cultural viruses evolving to exploit new vulnerabilities. In the 1980s, people feared poisoned Halloween candy, a reflection of distrust in neighborhoods. Today, we fear algorithms that might hack our children's minds. The underlying dread is identical, only the villain has upgraded. Even hoaxes like the black-eyed children, pale kids with soulless eyes who knock on doors begging for entry, echo ancient folklore about vampiric beings who need permission to cross thresholds. The difference, now they haunt Ring doorbells instead of castle gates. But here's the twist. These stories thrive because we want them to. The thrill of sharing a chilling tweet or forwarding a true ghost photo isn't just about fear, it's about connection. When you send a friend a link to the backrooms, that endless maze of yellow wallpaper supposedly lurking behind reality, you're not just scaring them. You're inviting them into a shared myth, a secret language of the weird and unexplained. It's the same impulse that made our ancestors gather around fires to whisper of witches and wraiths. The fire's just digital now, and that's the magic of urban legends. They prove that myth-making isn't some relic of the past. It's a living, breathing force. From chain emails warning of kidney thieves to Reddit threads dissecting the eerie symmetry of the Mandela effect, we're still spinning stories to make sense of chaos. Because whether it's a vengeful spirit or a glitch in the matrix, the message is the same. The world is stranger than it seems, and in that uncertainty, in that delicious, terrifying maybe, the oldest human tradition lives on. Not on parchment or stone, but in pixels and paranoia. Disney's magic doesn't just come from animation, it springs from something far older. The studio has a knack for taking myths that once sent shivers down spines and polishing them into glittering tales for family movie night. Take Hercules, for example. The original Greek hero wasn't just a lovable, misunderstood goof. His story was drenched in blood, madness, and tragic flaws. Hera's wrath drove him to slaughter his own family in a fit of divine-induced rage. Yet Disney's version trades that horror for singing muses and a villain who's more snarky than sinister. It's not a betrayal of the myth, it's an evolution, a way to make a 2,000-year-old hero relatable to kids clutching popcorn in a darkened theater. This isn't just Disney's trick, it's storytelling's oldest survival tactic. The Brothers Grimm knew it when they scrubbed the grimmest details from their fairy tales. Early versions of Cinderella had stepsisters hacking off their own toes to fit the slipper, and Sleeping Beauty wasn't awakened by true love's kiss but by, well, something far darker. Yet these softened versions didn't erase the originals, they became gateways. A child who falls in love with the Little Mermaid's Ariel might later discover Hans Christian Andersen's heartbreaking tale, where the mermaid dissolves into sea foam rather than marrying her prince. The lighter version doesn't replace the darker one. It keeps the story alive long enough for audiences to seek out its roots. What's fascinating is how these adaptations reflect the values of their time. Mulan transforms a Chinese ballad about filial piety into a girl power anthem, complete with a wisecracking dragon sidekick. Frozen takes Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, a story about icy detachment and redemption, and turns it into a celebration of sisterhood. These changes aren't accidents, they're cultural translations, ensuring ancient themes resonate with modern audiences. Even when Disney flattens a myth's complexities, it often preserves its soul. The moral of Beauty and the Beast, that true love sees beyond appearances, stays intact, even if the original French tale's darker edges get rounded off. Critics might argue that Disneyfication dilutes myths, stripping away their raw power, but there's another way to look at it. These retellings are like starter kits for mythology. They're the brightly illustrated cover that lures readers into the older, richer text. For every kid who watches Mona and then dives into Polynesian creation chants, or Encanto fans who explore Latin American magical realism, Disney's versions aren't dead ends, they're on-ramps. The studio's real magic isn't in simplifying stories, it's in making them sticky, ensuring they cling to the imagination long after the credits roll. And let's not forget, myths were never static to begin with. The Greek myths Disney draws from were themselves retellings, reshaped by each generation of poets. Homer's Odysseus isn't the same as Virgil's, and neither resembles the brooding antihero of modern novels like Circe. Myths survive because they're malleable, because they can mean something different to a medieval bard, a Victorian illustrator, or a team of Disney animators. So when Pocahontas trades historical tragedy for a romance with talking trees, it's not erasing the past, it's adding another layer to a story that's still being told. After all, the best myths aren't locked in books. They're alive, changing with every telling, and sometimes it takes a singing crab or a snowman who loves summer to keep them breathing. Video games have become the modern-day campfires where myths come alive, not just to be heard but to be lived. When you pick up a controller in God of War, you're not just learning about Norse mythology. You're swinging Leviathan axe through the 9 realms, facing down trolls and gods alike. The stories of Odin's cunning or Thor's fury aren't confined to dusty textbooks. They're visceral, immediate, and yours to navigate. This is the power of interactive storytelling. It transforms ancient legends from something you observe into something you shape. And that shift changes everything. Take Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where Viking sagas collide with historical fiction. As Eva, you don't just hear about the Norse pantheon. You drink with Thor in a mead hall, outwit Loki in a game of wits, and even glimpse the apocalyptic specter of Ragnarok. The game doesn't just borrow mythology, it reimagines it, letting players walk the blurred line between mortal and divine. Or consider Hades, where Zagreus' escape attempts from the underworld weave together Greek myths with rogue-like gameplay. Every run reveals new layers of Olympian family drama, turning what could have been a lore dump into a dynamic personal journey. These games don't just tell myths, they let you test them, asking, what would you do if confronted with a trickster god or an unbreakable prophecy? Then there's The Legend of Zelda, a series steeped in mythic cycles of its own making. Link's endless battles against Ganon echo the eternal struggle between order and chaos found in everything from Babylonian creation, myths to Arthurian legend. But here's the twist: unlike passive myths, Zelda games put the Master Sword in your hands. When you defeat Ganon, it's not just a story climax, it's your triumph, a moment that feels earned because you fought for it. This interactivity breathes new life into archetypes. The hero, the princess, the demon king, they're no longer distant symbols. They're roles you inhabit, choices you make. What's revolutionary is how these games democratize mythology. In the past, myths were handed down by priests or poets, their meanings fixed. Now they're playgrounds. Journey turns the hero's quest into a wordless, emotional pilgrimage across deserts and ruins, while Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, blends Celtic lore with a harrowing portrayal of mental health, making myth a lens for understanding trauma. Even indie titles like Tunic, with its cryptic, folklore-inspired world, prove you don't need epic budgets to create mythic resonance, just a willingness to let players uncover meaning for themselves. This isn't just entertainment, it's cultural preservation with a joystick. When a teenager in Tokyo battles Egyptian gods in Persona 5 or a streamer in Berlin solves puzzles based on Mayan astronomy in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, they're engaging with traditions that might otherwise feel foreign or forgotten. Games turn myths into shared experiences, bridging gaps between eras and continents. And because they're interactive, they stick. You might forget a paragraph about Freyja from a textbook, but you'll remember the time you played as her in Smite, weaving spells and strategies in her name. The brilliance of video games lies in their ability to make myths matter again. They don't just retell stories, they resurrect them, letting us live inside the tales that once defined civilizations. And in doing so, they prove something profound. Mythology isn't a relic. It's a living, evolving force, as adaptable as the technology that carries it forward. So the next time you boot up a game and step into a mythic world, remember, you're not just playing, you're keeping the oldest stories alive, one quest at a time. Comic books are more than just ink and paper. They're the pages where modern mythology is written. Look at Superman, an alien sent to Earth, raised by humble farmers, destined to become a beacon of hope. Strip away the cape, and his story echoes Moses in the bulrushes or Hercules' divine parentage. These heroes aren't just characters, They're archetypes, updated for an age of skyscrapers and subway systems instead of temples and olive groves. And just like the gods of old, they've spawned entire pantheons, with Marvel and DC acting as Mount Olympus and Asgard rolled into one. Batman's Gotham is a perfect example. It's a labyrinth of shadows and corruption, not so different from the underworld journeys of ancient heroes. The Joker isn't just a villain, he's Batman's Loki, a chaos god draped in purple, turning order into anarchy with a grin. Even Batman's origin, that fateful night in Crime Alley, mirrors the trials of mythic heroes forged in tragedy. These stories resonate because they're not new, they're retellings. Spider-Man's great power, great responsibility creed could have been lifted straight from King Arthur's lessons on justice, or the Bhagavad Gita's teachings on duty. What's fascinating is how comic books don't just borrow from myths, they absorb them wholesale. Wonder Woman isn't just inspired by Greek mythology, she's literally Diana of the Masera, an Amazonian warrior princess sculpted from clay and blessed by the gods. When she clashes with Ares, it's not a cameo, it's a continuation of a story that's been told for millennia. Thor's comics even play with this idea directly, framing his adventures as the Norse myths remembered by humanity, with the fantastical elements explained as alien technology or cosmic forces. It's a brilliant twist, acknowledging the mythic roots while grounding them in a universe of superheroes and science fiction. But here's where comics outdo even the ancients, their interconnectedness. Greek heroes might cross paths in epic cycles, but the Justice League and Avengers take it further, weaving hundreds of characters into a single, sprawling saga. The battles aren't just good versus evil, they're ideological clashes, like Captain America and Iron Man's Civil War, which mirrors the moral dilemmas of Achilles and Agamemnon. The X-Men's struggle for acceptance channels the outcast themes of countless cultural myths, from the biblical scapegoat to the shapeshifters of indigenous folklore. These stories aren't just escapism, they're the collective dreams of a society, grappling with power, identity, and justice in a language that's universal. And like all myths, they evolve. The Superman of the 1930s was a social crusader, punching corrupt politicians. Today, he's a symbol of hope in a fractured world. The Hulk began as a Cold War allegory about nuclear fears. Now, he's a meditation on trauma and control. Even lesser-known characters like Black Panther or MS. Marvel carry the weight of myth, embodying cultural pride and the immigrant experience with the same gravity as any legend. Because that's what comics do best. They take the old stories and make them breathe anew, proving that the human heart still beats to the rhythm of heroic tales, whether they're carved on cave walls or printed in 4-color splendor. Long before stories were written down, they lived in the voices of storytellers passed from generation to generation around fires, in marketplaces, under starry skies. Today, that tradition hasn't disappeared, it's just found a new home. The flickering light isn't from flames anymore, it's from screens. Films and television series have become our era's campfires, where myths are whispered, shouted, and sometimes even sung to audiences of millions. Think about it, when Star Wars first blasted into theaters in 1977, it wasn't just a movie, it was a myth reborn, complete with a farm boy destined for greatness, a rogue with a heart of gold, and a wise old mentor who'd vanish at just the right moment. Sound familiar? That's because George Lucas didn't invent these beats, he borrowed them from the same narrative well that fed King Arthur's legends and the hero's journey for thousands of years. Take Obi-Wan Kenobi. On the surface, he's a space wizard with a laser sword, but peel back the sci-fi veneer, and you'll find Merlin's DNA, the cryptic guidance, the sacrificial death, the voice that lingers even after he's gone. Or Neo in The Matrix, a messiah figure who wakes from the illusion of ordinary life to discover he's the one. His story mirrors countless savior myths, from Buddha's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree to Jesus resisting temptation in the desert. Even the Upside Down in Stranger Things isn't just a creepy alternate dimension. It's the latest incarnation of the underworld, a shadowy realm where heroes venture to rescue what's lost, just like Orpheus descending for Eurydice or Dante touring hell with Virgil as his guide. What's remarkable isn't just that these stories borrow from myth, it's how effortlessly they make them feel new. The Lord of the Rings didn't just recycle Norse sagas and Celtic lore. It remixed them into a tapestry so vivid that Middle-earth feels as real as any ancient civilization. Aragorn's path to kingship echoes Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, while Gollum's corruption by the One Ring mirrors the destructive lure of cursed artifacts in 1,000 folktales. Yet Tolkien's genius was in making these tropes feel fresh, proving that archetypes aren't cages, they're springboards, and just like oral traditions, these modern myths evolve with each retelling. The Harry Potter series didn't stop at books. It became films, theme parks, fan fiction, a living folklore that grows with its audience. The Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't just a set of movies. It's a sprawling epic where threads from Norse mythology, African futurism, and Cold War spy thrillers weave together into something unprecedented. These narratives don't just reference the past, they continue it, letting each generation imprint its own fears, hopes, and dreams onto the same timeless frameworks. Here's the beautiful paradox. The more technology changes how we tell stories, the more they stay the same. A medieval bard would instantly recognize the rhythm of a Game of Thrones plot twist or the catharsis of Avatar's battle for balance. Because whether it's a bard's lute or a Dolby surround system, the tools are just vessels. The real magic lies in the stories themselves, the ones that remind us, across centuries and cultures, what it means to be brave, to love, to lose, and to rise again. And as long as we keep gathering, whether in theaters or living rooms, to share these tales, the ancient fires will never truly go out. Literature doesn't just preserve myths, it reinvents them, breathing new life into characters who have waited centuries for their turn in the spotlight. Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology doesn't just recite Viking tales, it cracks them open like a frost giant's skull, revealing the humor, heart, and absurdity buried beneath the epic grandeur. His Loki isn't just a villain, he's a sarcastic, self-sabotaging trickster who'd feel right at home in a modern sitcom, yet he's undeniably the same chaos agent who sparked Ragnarok. Gaiman's genius lies in his lightness of touch, translating the thunder of ancient poetry into prose that crackles with contemporary energy. Suddenly, Odin's wisdom feels less like divine decree and more like the hard-won insight of a weary king who's seen too much, and Thor's bravado becomes endearingly human, a muscle-bound hero who's maybe not as clever as he thinks. Then there's Madeline Miller's Circe, a novel that does something radical. It hands the microphone to a goddess who'd been relegated to the margins of Homer's Odyssey. In Miller's hands, Circe isn't just a witch who turns men into pigs. She's a woman scorned by gods and mortals alike, carving out agency in a world determined to silence her. Her story resonates because it's not just about ancient grudges. It's about power, survival, and the quiet rebellion of self-discovery. When Circe chooses exile over submission, or motherhood over vengeance, she's not just a figure from myth, she's every person who's ever been underestimated, then refused to stay that way. Miller's prose turns Aeir's shores into a stage for themes as old as time and as fresh as today's headlines. Who gets to tell their story? Who gets to be the hero? Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series takes a different approach, transplanting Greek gods into sneaker-wearing, Wi-Fi demanding modernity. Zeus runs his empire from the Empire State Building's 600th floor, while Hades wears designer suits and runs an underworld that's equal parts bureaucracy and heavy metal concert. Riordan's brilliance is in making mythology feel like a secret layer of reality, hiding just beneath the surface of middle school math tests and summer camp. For young readers, Percy's dyslexic, ADHD-fueled heroism isn't just entertaining, it's validating. Suddenly, the quirks that make them feel out of place in the classroom are the very traits that mark them as demigods, descendants of legends. Riordan doesn't just update myths, he weaponizes them, turning them into tools for empathy, inclusion, and sheer, unadulterated fun. What unites these authors isn't just their source material, it's their refusal to treat myths as artifacts behind glass. They scrape away the patina of time to reveal the raw, messy humanity beneath. When Margaret Atwood reimagines the Odyssey from Penelope's perspective in the Penelopiad, she's not just flipping the script, she's asking why we've accepted Odysseus' version of events for 3,000 years. When Pat Barker gives voice to Bryce Eyes in The Silence of the Girls, she's not just filling in Homer's gaps, she's challenging us to question who history remembers and who it erases. These retellings aren't revisions, they're revolutions, proving that myths aren't set in stone. They're clay, waiting for new hands to reshape them, and that's the magic of literature's relationship with mythology. It doesn't just keep the old stories alive, it lets them grow, adapt, and speak to each generation in a language they understand. Whether it's a feminist reclaiming of a sidelined sorceress, a middle schooler discovering their divine heritage, or a Norse god complaining about the hassle of undead warriors, these stories remind us that myths were never meant to be static. Their conversations loud, messy, and endlessly evolving between the past and the present. And as long as there are writers willing to listen and readers eager to hear, that conversation will never end. Music has always been the bloodstream of myth, a way to make the ancient pulse with modern life. When Richard Wagner composed his Ring Cycle in the 1800s, he wasn't just setting Norse legends to music. He was forging a new kind of mythic language where leitmotifs, those recurring musical themes, acted like sonic runes, binding gods and mortals together in a tapestry of sound. The opera house became his Valhalla, the audience his hall of slain heroes, and the music itself a kind of magic spell. Fast forward to the 1970s, and Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song distilled that same Norse fury into 3 minutes of electrified adrenaline. Robert Plant's wail, Hammer of the Gods, wasn't just a lyric, it was a bridge between Viking longships and rock and roll amplifiers, proving that Thor's thunder could be channeled through a Marshall stack. But mythic music isn't stuck in the past, it's alive in every genre. Beyoncé's Lemonade isn't just an album, it's a modern-day oracle, channeling the Yoruba goddess Oshun through golden visuals and haunting melodies. When she stands knee-deep in water, draped in yellow, she's not just performing, she's invoking. Oshun, the goddess of love and rivers, becomes a symbol of resilience, her mythic power reframed for an era of black womanhood and healing. Similarly, Florence Welch of Florence Plus the Machine doesn't just sing about heartbreak, she frames it as Greek tragedy, her voice soaring like a chorus from Antigone, turning personal pain into something epic and universal. In Seven Devils, she conjures biblical and mythological imagery, blurring the lines between sin and salvation, love and war. Music videos elevate this fusion, transforming songs into miniature mythologies. Take Madonna's Like a Prayer, where burning crosses and stigmata collide with gospel choirs, creating a visceral modern parable about faith and desire. Or Billie Eilish's All the Good Girls Go to Hell, a dystopian fable brimming with fallen angels and environmental ruin, its imagery ripped straight from Revelation but filtered through Gen Z angst. These aren't just visuals, they're rituals, using the language of myth to amplify emotion. Even hip-hop thrives on this alchemy. Kendrick Lamar's King Kunta resurrects the spirit of the trickster, while Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer album weaves Afrofuturist mythos into every beat, casting herself as a cybernetic rebel battling oppression. What makes these musical myths so powerful is their immediacy. A 3-minute pop song can evoke the grandeur of an epic, distilling centuries of storytelling into a hook or a refrain. When Hosea sings "Take Me to Church," he's not just referencing religion, he's tapping into the same primal tension between sacred and profane that fueled Dionysian rites. When Lana Del Rey croons about doomed lovers in Off to the Races, she's channeling the fatal romance of Persephone and Hades, but with a vintage Hollywood sheen. These artists understand that myths aren't relics, they're raw material waiting to be remixed. And that's the secret. Music doesn't just borrow from myths, it becomes myth. The stadium tour is the new pilgrimage, the vinyl record the sacred scroll. The fans scream the echo of ancient invocations. From the Gregorian chants of medieval monks to the synth-laden anthems of today, the thread remains unbroken. Because when a song resonates deep enough, when it makes you feel like you're touching something eternal, that's not just artistry, it's mythology in motion. And as long as humans have hearts to pound and stories to tell, the gods will keep singing through us. Fashion isn't just about fabric and fit, it's a language, one that whispers secrets from the past into the present. Take the Egyptian Ankh, a looped cross that once symbolized eternal life in the tombs of pharaohs. Today, it dangles from silver chains in downtown boutiques, its meaning blurred but its power intact. The wearer might not know its origins as a key to the afterlife, but they sense its weight, its connection to something older and deeper than trends. That's the magic of these symbols. They carry resonance even when their stories fade, like echoes of a myth half remembered. Celtic knots tell a similar tale. Once carved into stone by Iron Age artisans, their endless loops symbolize the cyclical nature of life and the interconnectedness of all things. Now they wrap around wrists as tattoo sleeves or embroider the cuffs of high-end jackets, their geometric precision turning sacred art into streetwear. But here's the twist: even when divorced from their spiritual roots, these designs still feel significant. A knot isn't just a pattern, it's a puzzle, a visual spell that hints at mysteries older than written history. And that's why they endure. In a world of fast fashion and disposable trends, ancient symbols offer something rare, a tether to timelessness. Designers have long understood this alchemy. Alexander McQueen's runway shows didn't just feature clothing, they staged mythic confrontations. His 2007 In Memory of Elizabeth Howe, Salem 1692 collection transformed models into modern-day witches, their garments embroidered with pentagrams and runes. The message was clear: these symbols aren't relics, they're weapons, tools for reclaiming narratives of power and persecution. Versace, too, leans hard into mythos. Their Medusa logo isn't just a branding choice. It's a dare. In Greek myth, Medusa's gaze turned men to stone. On a Versace dress, she becomes an emblem of unapologetic fierceness, her snake-like hair a warning and a badge of honor. Even sports teams play this game. The Minnesota Vikings don't just use a horned helmet as a mascot. They invoke the primal fear of Norse raiders, turning mythic terror into hometown pride. The Chicago Bulls logo isn't just a strong animal, it's a modern-day minotaur, a symbol of raw, untamed strength. These images work because they tap into something primal, a collective memory of heroes and monsters that predates stadiums and sneaker deals. But the most fascinating transformations happen on skin. Tattoos of the Valknut, a Norse symbol tied to Odin and the afterlife, might adorn the arms of someone who's never set foot in Scandinavia. A Japanese yokai inked onto a back in Brooklyn isn't just art. It's a passport to a folklore its wearer might only half know, and that's the point. These symbols aren't chosen for historical accuracy. They're chosen because they mean something, even if that meaning is personal, fluid, or lost in translation. So the next time you see a winged victory on a sneaker or a dragon coiled around a watch face, remember, you're not just looking at decoration. You're witnessing the afterlife of myths, where gods and monsters walk among us not in temples or storybooks, but in the fabric of everyday life. And whether we realize it or not, every time we wear these symbols, we become part of their story, stitching new chapters into a tapestry that's still being woven. Religion doesn't emerge in a vacuum, it grows from the soil of older beliefs, weaving ancient myths into new sacred tapestries. Consider Christmas, a holiday draped in Christian significance, yet stitched with threads much older. The evergreen tree, now central to Yuletide celebrations, once stood in pagan winter festivals as a symbol of life enduring the frost. Even the date December 25th aligns with solstice traditions, a time when cultures from Rome to Scandinavia celebrated the returning sun. This isn't coincidence, it's syncretism, the quiet alchemy that transforms old gods into new saints, harvest rituals into holy days. The Virgin Mary cradling the infant Jesus echoes Isis nursing Horus, just as Saint Bridget of Ireland carries the torch of her Celtic namesake, the goddess of fire and poetry. These aren't replacements, they're reinventions, proof that spirituality evolves by absorbing the stories that came before. Halloween offers another striking example. What began as Samhain, a Celtic festival marking the thinning veil between worlds, now sees children dressed as superheroes collecting candy. Yet beneath the plastic masks and pumpkin spice, the bones of the old rite remain, the honoring of ancestors, the playful confrontation with death, the sense that for one night the ordinary rules don't apply. Even Dia de los Muertos in Mexico blends Catholic imagery with indigenous Aztec traditions, turning graves into altars and mourning into celebration. These holidays aren't pagan or Christian, they're palimpsests, layers of meaning written over and over without fully erasing what came before. The fluidity between myth and religion becomes even clearer when we examine saints and local deities. Across Latin America, Catholic saints often bear uncanny resemblances to pre-Columbian gods. The Virgin of Guadalupe, for instance, appeared on Tepeyac Hill, a site already sacred to Tonantzin, the Aztec mother goddess. In Haiti, Vodou practitioners honor the LWA, spirits who frequently merge with Catholic saints, like the warrior Ogun syncretized with Saint James the Apostle. This blending isn't accidental, it's a survival strategy, a way for oppressed cultures to preserve their spiritual roots under the cloak of imposed faith. The result, a living mythology, one where saints walk hand in hand with the gods they were meant to replace. Secular societies aren't immune to this phenomenon either. Think of the way modern wellness culture borrows from Eastern spirituality, turning chakras and karma into buzzwords stripped of their original context. Or how science fiction franchises like Star Wars borrow messianic arcs and Zen philosophies, repackaging ancient questions about destiny and the Force for a tech-savvy audience. Even atheists often unknowingly participate in mythic frameworks. Rituals like New Year's resolutions or graduation ceremonies echo ancient rites of passage, marking transitions with symbolic weight. What does this tell us? That the human need for myth isn't bound by dogma or doctrine. Whether through religion, folklore, or pop culture, we keep reaching for narratives that help us navigate the unknown. The labels change, sacred text becomes legend, deity becomes archetype, but the core remains. A Hindu reciting the Ramayana and a Marvel fan cheering for Thor's latest adventure are, in a way, participating in the same timeless act, finding meaning in stories bigger than themselves. And that's the true power of mythology. It refuses to die. It simply shape-shifts, ensuring that whether we kneel in a cathedral or binge-watch a fantasy series, we're never far from the gods of old. Carl Jung saw myths as more than just fireside tales. They were windows into the deepest chambers of the human mind. His concept of the collective unconscious suggests that beneath our personal memories and experiences lies a shared reservoir of images and stories, hardwired into our species. Think of it like a psychic inheritance, passed down not through genes but through dreams, visions, and the stories we can't stop retelling. This is why cultures separated by oceans and millennia still dream up eerily similar tales: dragon slayers, world-ending floods, tricksters who defy the gods. These aren't coincidences, they're echoes of something primal, etched into the bedrock of our imagination. Take the hero's journey, a pattern so universal it feels instinctive. Whether it's a Sumerian epic carved into clay or Star Wars scrolling across a screen, the bones of the story remain. A reluctant hero, a wise mentor, a descent into darkness, a triumphant return. Jung would argue these aren't just plot points. They're archetypes, psychic blueprints that guide us through our own struggles. Modern therapy leans into this power. Narrative therapy, for example, helps patients reframe their lives as heroic quests, transforming trauma into trials and resilience into hard-won wisdom. When someone views their depression as a labyrinth to navigate rather than a life sentence, they're not just coping, they're tapping into a mythic toolkit older than civilization itself. Films have become our era's mythmakers, probing these psychological depths with dazzling precision. Inception doesn't just play with dreams, it mirrors the shamanic journey, where heroes dive into subconscious realms to retrieve hidden truth. The spinning top at the end isn't just a plot twist, it's a modern-day oracle, leaving us to wrestle with the same questions ancient cultures asked: what's real? How much of our world is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves? The Matrix takes it further, blending Plato's allegory of the cave with cyberpunk aesthetics. Neo's awakening isn't just sci-fi, it's a retelling of the Gnostic myth of enlightenment, where the material world is an illusion and true freedom lies in piercing the veil. These films resonate because they're not just about myths, they are myths repurposed for an age of code and algorithms. Even our nightmares speak in mythic tongues. The shadow, one of Jung's most potent archetypes, lurks in every story where heroes face their darker halves. Batman's battles with the Joker aren't just good versus evil, they're a dance with the unacknowledged parts of the self, the chaos we try to bury but never quite escape. Black Swan turns this inward, with Nina's pursuit of perfection conjuring a literal doppelganger, a manifestation of everything she fears in herself. These narratives work because they externalize the internal, giving form to fears and desires that might otherwise stay nameless. Jung's greatest insight was that myths aren't relics, they're living, breathing tools for survival. When a child fears the monster under the bed, they're rehearsing an ancient script about confronting the unknown. When we binge a fantasy series or lose ourselves in a video game, we're not just escaping reality, we're practicing for it, testing strategies for courage, sacrifice, and resilience. The collective unconscious isn't a museum, it's a workshop where the old stories get remade for new battles. And in a world that often feels as chaotic as any mythic cosmos, that might be the most comforting truth of all. We're not just telling these stories, we're living them, one archetype at a time. Long before classrooms existed, myths were humanity's first textbooks lessons wrapped in the irresistible packaging of story. Aesop didn't just entertain with his talking tortoises and cunning foxes. He encoded ethics into fables so sticky they've survived 2 millennia. The Iliad wasn't merely a war epic. It was a masterclass in honor, grief, and the cost of pride, passed down by bards to shape generations. These stories worked because they didn't preach, they seduced, embedding wisdom in narratives so vivid they couldn't be forgotten. Fast forward to today, and educators still harness that power. When a literature teacher compares Beowulf's monster slaying to modern superhero sagas, they're not just analyzing plot structures, they're showing students how heroism evolves while its core remains unchanged. But myths don't just teach morality, they're mirrors for cultural values. A Greek tragedy about hubris becomes a launchpad for discussing modern leadership failures. The Anansi tales of West Africa, where a spider outsmarts larger foes, transform into conversations about resilience and creative problem solving in marginalized communities. Even creation myths, from the dreamtime of indigenous Australians to the scientific elegance of the Big Bang, become tools for exploring how societies frame their place in the cosmos. The genius lies in the contrast. By holding ancient and modern stories side by side, students spot patterns. Why do so many cultures have flood myths? What does the recurring trickster archetype reveal about our ambivalence toward authority? Suddenly, history isn't a list of dates, it's a detective story with myths as clues. Role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons take this further, turning passive learning into active myth-making. When players craft characters with tragic backstories or devise quests inspired by Arthurian legends, they're not just playing, they're inheriting the bard's mantle. A dungeon master weaving a campaign about a cursed artifact isn't just world-building, they're channeling the same impulses that led Vikings to whisper of Anvaranot, the ring that doomed kings. These games teach collaboration, empathy, and consequence in ways textbooks can't. A paladin's moral dilemma, save the village or pursue the villain, echoes the Odyssey's themes of duty versus desire, but with one crucial difference: the student isn't just analyzing Odysseus' choices. They're living them. The real magic happens when learners see themselves in these loops of narrative. A teen grappling with identity might find solace in Loki's fluidity or strength in the Navajo changing woman's transformations. A debate about Harry Potter's house Slytherin becomes a lens for discussing how societies label the other. By engaging with myths, students don't just study the past, they join a conversation spanning centuries where their voices matter. Because the best education doesn't just fill minds with facts, it ignites them with stories that say, "You're part of this too." And when a lesson ends with a student asking, "What myth would I create?" that's when the old magic sparks anew. Ancient myths didn't just entertain, they sounded alarms, warning of the dire consequences when humans forget their place in the natural order. The Greeks told of Icarus, whose wax wings melted because he flew too close to the sun, a parable about overreach that feels eerily prescient in an age of melting ice caps and soaring carbon emissions. The Haida people of the Pacific Northwest spoke of Raven, who stole fresh water for humanity, but only after learning to respect its sacred sources. Even the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel, where human ambition leads to catastrophic fragmentation, mirrors modern anxieties about technology outpacing wisdom. These stories share a common thread: the peril of imbalance, the danger of believing we're exempt from nature's laws. Fast forward to today, and our blockbusters have become the new myth makers, painting vivid portraits of ecological reckoning. Avatar's Pandora isn't just a fictional moon, it's a neon-lit reflection of indigenous wisdom. where the Navi's neural connection to their environment stands in stark contrast to Earth's strip-mining invaders. The film's villain, Colonel Quaritch, embodies the same hubris as the mythic kings who felled sacred forests, blind to the truth that destroying the web of life means unraveling their own survival. Mad Max Fury Road takes it further, depicting a parched wasteland where water and greenery are relics of the past, a vision that feels less like fantasy and more like a cautionary snapshot of our trajectory. These narratives aren't escapism, they're waking dreams, forcing us to confront what happens when the warnings of old go unheeded. But here's where ancient myths offer more than just doom, they provide a roadmap. The Navajo concept of Haja, often translated as walking in beauty, teaches that harmony isn't passive, it's an active covenant between humans and the earth. Compare this to modern permaculture principles, where agriculture mimics natural ecosystems rather than dominating them. Both philosophies reject the illusion of separation, recognizing that sustainability isn't about saving the planet, it's about remembering we're part of it. Even the Celtic legend of the Green Man, a face woven from leaves and vines, finds new life in today's urban forestry movements, where cities are reclaiming concrete jungles as shared breathing spaces. The real power of these stories lies in their emotional resonance. Data on rising sea levels might numb us with scale, but the Inuit tale of Sedna, a goddess whose severed fingers became sea creatures after her father betrayed her, makes the ocean's fragility personal. Climate reports can feel abstract, but the Maori story of Tain Mahuta, who separated earth and sky to create a world for his children, frames stewardship as familial duty. Myths translate statistics into soul language, reminding us that environmental crises aren't just about parts per million of CO2, they're about broken relationships, stolen futures, and the chance to rewrite endings. Perhaps that's why modern activists are increasingly turning to mythic framing. Greta Thunberg's House on Fire speeches channel the urgency of Cassandra's prophecies, while indigenous water protectors at Standing Rock invoke the Lakota prophecy of the Black Snake, a pipeline threatening to poison the lifeblood of the land. These aren't just tactics, they're acknowledgments that logic alone won't move hearts. To spark real change, we need stories that bypass debate and strike straight at identity, asking not just what should we do, but who do we want to be? The answer might lie in myth's greatest gift, its cyclical nature. Unlike our linear obsession with progress, myths remind us that destruction often precedes renewal. The phoenix immolates itself to rise from ashes. The Hindu cycle of creation and dissolution, governed by Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, suggests endings are also beginnings. Even Mad Max's Fury Road ends not with despair, but with seeds carried back to a citadel, a tiny act of faith in regrowth. These stories don't promise easy fixes, but they do something more vital. They rekindle the radical idea that another world is possible, if we're brave enough to listen to the whispers of the past. For centuries, myths have been wielded like mirrors, but too often, they only reflected half the story. The classical canon is crowded with warrior kings and questing heroes, while women linger on the sidelines as prizes, monsters, or afterthoughts. Helen of Troy's face may have launched 1,000 ships, but Homer gives her no interiority, just a beautiful catalyst for men's wars. Medusa's snake-haired Visas became a symbol of terror, yet her origin as a victim of Athena's punishment rarely took center stage. These weren't just narrative choices, they were cultural blueprints, reinforcing hierarchies where power and voice belonged overwhelmingly to men. But something transformative has been unfolding in recent years, a quiet revolution where silenced figures are stepping out of the margins to reclaim their stories. Consider Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls, a seismic retelling of the Iliad from Briseis' perspective. In Homer's original, she's a trophy passed between Achilles and Agamemnon, her humanity erased by the word concubine. Barker's novel does more than give her a voice. It exposes the machinery of myth-making itself, revealing how epic glory often depends on the suffering of invisible women. When Briseis narrates her own captivity, the Trojan War stops being a tale of honor and becomes what it always was, a system where women's bodies are battlefields. Similarly, Madeline Miller's Circe transforms a sidelined sorceress into a complex protagonist who resists the gods' cruelty through witchcraft, motherhood, and sheer stubborn will. These aren't just feminist takes on old stories, they're corrections, peeling back layers of patriarchal bias to uncover the raw, messy humanity beneath. Film and television have joined this reckoning, weaponizing visual spectacle to dismantle tired tropes. Disney's live-action Mulan strips away the musical comedy of the original, reframing the heroine's cross-dressing as a deliberate act of defiance against a society that values sons over daughters. The 2018 Troy, Fall of a City miniseries dares to ask, what if Helen wasn't a passive abductee but a woman making agonizing choices within impossible constraints? Even horror gets subversive. The Northman's Olga isn't just a love interest. She's a Slavic witch whose magic equals the Viking protagonist's brute strength. These adaptations recognize that myths aren't set in stone, they're conversations, and it's long past time for more voices to join. The backlash to these retellings often centers on accusations of rewriting history, but that argument crumbles under scrutiny. Myths were always fluid, reshaped by each generation to serve its values. The Greeks themselves debated Helen's culpability. Was she truly in Troy, or just a phantom while the real Helen waited in Egypt? Ovid's Metamorphoses gave Medusa new pathos centuries after Homer, portraying her as a beautiful maiden violated by Poseidon. The idea that myths have one true version is itself a myth. Modern reinterpretations aren't erasing tradition, they're participating in it, continuing the ancient practice of bending stories to reflect contemporary truths. What's at stake isn't just artistic license, it's cultural power. When marginalized groups see themselves as heroes rather than footnotes, it reshapes collective imagination. The Witches' Thomasin embracing dark magic isn't just a plot twist, it's a reclamation of female rage too often demonized. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse's Gwen Stacy swinging through dimensions in her ballet slippers proves heroism isn't gendered. These narratives matter because myths aren't just stories, they're the frameworks through which we understand agency, justice, and possibility. And as long as they're being told, they'll keep evolving, one bold retelling at a time. From the flickering shadows of prehistoric caves to the high-definition glow of our screens, myths have never just been stories, they're the lifeblood of human imagination. Every culture, every era has spun its own version of the same fundamental truths, dressing them in the clothes of their time but never changing their essence. A Babylonian mother soothing her child with the tale of Gilgamesh's grief wasn't so different from a modern parent reading Harry Potter aloud. Both were using myth to navigate the messy, beautiful terrain of what it means to be alive. The names change, the settings update, but the heart of these stories remains. The hero's courage, the lover's sacrifice, the eternal struggle between chaos and order. Think about the last time you felt a shiver of recognition watching a film or reading a book. When Black Panther's T'Challa faced Killmonger on the ancestral plain, bathed in the purple hues of a spectral savanna, that wasn't just a superhero showdown, it was a modern-day catabasis, the ancient trope of a hero descending to the underworld to confront his legacy. The neon-lit streets of Blade Runner 2049 might seem worlds apart from the misty forests of Arthurian legend, yet both ask the same haunting question: what makes us human? Technology evolves, but our hunger for meaning doesn't. A medieval peasant marveling at stained glass saints and a teenager binge-watching Stranger Things are united by the same awe, the same need for stories that make the universe feel vast and intimate all at once. What's extraordinary isn't just that these myths survive, it's how they do it. Like water, they take the shape of whatever container holds them. The trickster, once embodied by Loki's silver tongue and Anansi's cunning, now lives in the sarcastic quips of Deadpool and the chaotic charm of Rick and Morty. The monstrous Grendel of Beowulf, a shadowy force of pure malice, finds his descendants in aliens xenomorph and A Quiet Place's sound-hunting creatures, terrors that reflect our deepest fears, whether of the dark forest or the void of space. Even love stories, from Orpheus' doomed glance back to La La Land's bittersweet piano melody, remind us that some heartaches transcend time. But here's the secret: myths don't persist because they're ancient, they persist because they're alive. They don't belong to dusty tomes, they thrive in fan theories, cosplay, and the way a child reenacts Mona's voyage with a cardboard canoe. When a YouTuber analyzes Star Wars through the lens of Joseph Campbell, or a TikTok trend resurrects Norse runes as self-care symbols, the old stories are breathing anew. They're not relics to be preserved under glass, they're seeds, waiting for the next generation to plant them in fresh soil. So as the digital age hurtles forward, don't mistake the medium for the message. A myth told through virtual reality or an AI-generated poem is still a myth, as long as it carries that spark of truth. The future of storytelling might look unimaginable to us now: holographic epics, neural link adventures. But the stories themselves will still whisper the same questions. Who are we? Why are we here, and what do we owe each other? The answers will keep changing, and that's the point. Myths aren't shackles to the past, they're bridges, inviting us to walk back and forth between what was and what could be. So go ahead, tell your stories, rewrite the old ones, let them surprise you, because every time you do, you're adding your voice to a chorus that's been singing since the dawn of time. And that chorus, it's nowhere near finished. You've just traveled through thousands of years of storytelling, watching myths morph from sacred tales whispered around fires to blockbusters lighting up screens. But here's the thing: this conversation isn't over. It's your turn now. What's that one modern story that gave you chills when you realized its ancient roots? Maybe it's the way Game of Thrones echoes the Wars of the Roses, or how the Hunger Games mirrors the Minotaur's labyrinth with its own deadly arena. Drop your favorite myth meets modern moment in the comments. We're all here to geek out over these connections. And if this deep dive into the DNA of storytelling hooked you, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to help these videos reach more myth lovers, and hit subscribe so you never miss an adventure into history's shadowy corners. Turn on notifications too, because trust us, you won't want to blink when we unravel the next mystery. Myths are living things after all. They grow every time someone new discovers them, every time a fresh voice adds to the tale. So let's keep this going. Share, debate, theorize. Who knows, your comment might just inspire the next video. After all, the oldest stories survived because they were passed hand to hand. Now it's your turn to carry them